Hey, it's just want to welcome everybody to this. It's supposed to be fireside chat in the middle of a very hot day here. I'm in upstate New York. And Dawn, this is kind of exciting because you're in China and you actually planned on being back in the US and have got caught up in the coronavirus travel restrictions, right?
Yes, my flight was canceled and actually has been canceled several times now. Each time was postponed a little bit. But so, right, I was planning to be back by now. Yes. Yeah, anyway, so let's get started. Right, so Ali, you have a very interesting background. Could you first talk a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. I'm a physician by way of background, and I have a dual board certification, so medically recognized subspecialty in primary care and in clinical informatics. And I tell people that means that I'm bilingual, that I speak clinical and I speak technology. So you'll hear me go back and forth between both. And as part of that informatics board certification, and we also deal with policy and regulation around health IT as well. And I've been working in emerging technology my whole career, all the way from paper-based records to where we are today with blockchain.
Yeah, that's great. It's great to have you here. It's such a unique and rare, this mix of backgrounds.
Right. And then I look at you, and you're a computer scientist as well. So you're speaking that technical, and then you have this interest in healthcare through Oasis Labs. So part of me was like, oh, is Oasis Labs just healthcare, or you do more than healthcare at Oasis Labs?
Yes, I'm happy to talk a little bit about myself and my background as well. I'm a professor at UC Berkeley in computer science, and also I'm the founder and CEO of a startup called Oasis Labs. And at Oasis Labs, we are building what we call a platform for a responsible data economy. Essentially enables data to be utilized in a more responsible and privacy-preserving way. And given that when we talk about data and privacy for data, of course, medical data is some of the most privacy sensitive data, and hence healthcare is it's particularly a very good use case and application domain for this type of technology, and also how important data is for healthcare, and hence for Oasis Labs, as we build up this platform for a responsible data economy, healthcare is the first application domain that we have been exploring, and with some successful use cases. And of course, the technology that we develop is general. It's not just specific for healthcare. And in fact, we have been exploring use cases in other application domains as well, including financial areas, ad tech, and other, for example, IoT space as well.
Right. So because healthcare has this very specific, as you said, very useful data, impacts so many people's lives, especially if we can share it. And we have to be so sensitive to keeping it private as well. And so we'll get questions say, well, is there a trade-off? Is there a point of exposing people's data, the trade-off for public good? And so we get asked about that trade-off. And I know at Ernst & Young, we kind of went in with Consensus Health and Microsoft, and we released protocols that are privacy preserving. And it's not just for healthcare, but other business transactions or smart contracts you want to keep private. But we released a baseline protocol into the public domain, so you don't have to have that trade-off, that you can have responsible sharing of data and still preserve privacy using the Ethereum mainnet, so using zero-knowledge proofs. How does Oasis approach privacy and transparency? I think we're in agreement on the trade-off, or do you feel there needs to be a trade-off?
Yes, that's a very good question. That's essentially what we are working towards. That's what we are striving for, is that we can enable privacy preserving usage of data and this responsible use of data, and also at the same time, still enable the transparency, enable actually users to know how their data has been utilized and so on. And at Oasis in particular, what we focus on is actually application use cases that's much broader than, for example, what Ethereum enables. So for example, the kind of privacy preserving usage that you talk about on Ethereum using zero knowledge proofs, they are more focused on privacy preserving financial transactions. So it's just about, transferring money, for example, from one person to another, and you want to protect the privacy for that transaction. But however, when we talk about, for example, healthcare and many other application domains, then what we need is actually much more than just financial transactions. We actually need to be able to enable data to be utilized, for example, doing data analysis, training machine learning models on the data, for example, on medical data to try to detect disease early on, to provide better cures for diseases. And in these cases, also we want to ensure that we protect users' privacy and also at the same time to still enable data to be utilized for these important goals and purposes. And that's really what the platform for a responsible data economy that at Oasis that we are building towards to try to address these challenges. And in particular, with our platform, we enable users to maintain control of their data and to specify also how they want their data to be utilized. Data is stored in an encrypted form. And when data is being used, the computation of the data happens in what we call a secure computing environment. And also through various different privacy technologies, we ensure that the usage of the data can be compliant to users' policies for how they want their data to be utilized. And also we ensure that the usage of the data is being logged and it's putting into the immutable log in the blockchain ledger and so on. So altogether, by combining blockchain and privacy technologies, we enable users to maintain control and their data rights to the data, and also at the same time to enable data to be utilized in a privacy preserving way. And so ideally achieving both privacy and this transparency at the same time.
So when you think about data rights, I know the way we've approached it, for data rights, and when it comes to healthcare, we've put the patient at the center, and we've said everything needs to start with patient consent. And right now we feel that, and it's patient data sharing consent. I should be specific, not consent for procedure or consent to participate in a study, but data sharing consent. Generally right now it's difficult and opaque to see how our data is shared. Once I agree to share data for one reason, I have no control over whether it's shared for another reason, de-identified, used, etc. People grab it. So we put the patient at the center, and we think blockchain is very useful for that, for sharing how you want to share consent, track who you've shared and given consent to, for what data and for what purpose. Without exposing. How do you, at Oasis Labs, deal with data rights, and who do you look, say, who owns the data and what rights do they have?
Right, yeah. Yes, this is a very good question, and you've made a very good point. So in particular here, we view, that's why we want to combine, and in particular marry blockchain and privacy and secure computing technologies together. It's exactly to enable capabilities and features like this. So for example, the blockchain can be used to provide the immutable log for users' data rights and the policies of how they want their data to be utilized. And then, so essentially, for example, the blockchain, you can use that to record patient's consent and so on. But then still, what you just mentioned, so today, users, patients, they don't really know actually, once they consent, what their data is used for, how their data has been used, who is using their data, and so on. Because right now, all that actually happens outside of the system in some sense. The patients don't have a way to know. So that's why when we combine the blockchain, the ledger, with actually a secure computing environment, then in this case, every time when the data is being used, we actually know we can actually have an immutable log of that usage of the data into the blockchain, and also with this secure computing environment, we can ensure that when the data is being used, the data isn't just copied out into some asset of the system, because once the data is copied out, then you can never know what happens to the data. By combining the blockchain ledger and the secure computing environments, we ensure that the data essentially will stay inside the secure computing environment as it's being used. And also, we have various ways to ensure that we can check that the usage of the data is compliant with the policy. And also in this case, you can know who is using your data, and you can have a log, the computation that has been done on the data, and all this together then can really, actually for the first time, to ensure that the users can actually know what has happened to their data, and ensure that the data actually is satisfies its policy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great.
So that's why it's really important to marry the two. And we actually call this the blockchain 3.0, because I think for blockchain 1.0 is more like a Bitcoin, and the blockchain 2.0 is like Ethereum, that adds some of the smart contract capabilities. But we feel that still, actually, it's really important to have this strong marriage of blockchain and secure compute. So we call this actually blockchain 3.0 to really enable these new capabilities that couldn't be enabled.
Yeah, and more frequently, I frequently get asked questions about HIPAA and where data is moving, and HIPAA, and I have to remind people that it's very specific. HIPAA is very specific to entities that bill Medicare electronically, or the business associates that support that. And HIPAA has its own requirements, as you say, for a secure computing environment. That these covered entities are required to maintain data in those secure environments. So have you also looked at, maybe help me understand, is the Oasis model one we like, where we leave the data there, the data never moves there. We really send the algorithms and the insights is what moves on blockchain, not the data itself. Is that similar to what Oasis is doing?
Yes, that's a very good question. So for the Oasis platform, what's on the blockchain really, as I mentioned, these are logs of immutable logs of users' rights to data and their policies of how they want their data to be utilized, and also logs of how the data has been used. So every time the data is used, there will be logs of the usage of the data, what computation, what type of, essentially the kind of computation that has been done on the data, and so on. So really the ledger is a log of the various aspects of the data, but the data itself is never really stored on the ledger itself. Also, as you can imagine, with healthcare data and so on, like there's so much data, so it doesn't really make sense to store the data itself on the ledger. But what we do is that, again, we have the secure computing environments and also secure storage environments where the data is in, and also in certain cases the data really can be stored in a distributed form. In certain cases, either the patients or the hospitals, they can maintain their own storage, and we just ensure that we have ways so the data, of course, is stored in encrypted form, and we can check its integrity as well. And the important part is just when the data is used, it can only be used in the secure computing or secure execution environment.
So, and how does this translate into data marketplaces? 'Cause right now we have the data sitting in these secure environments and healthcare settings, but can you talk a little about data marketplaces in healthcare and what you see the future is for that?
Right, that's a really good question. And also in particular, the technology for that we are building at Oasis Labs for a responsible data economy, I think can really enable a new era for data marketplaces. So as we know, data is a key driver of modern economy. Essentially, especially going to the future, all the important decisions, they will all be data driven and so on. And so data is really, really important, and it's as we know, it's hugely valuable. And so today there is nascent data marketplaces, but however, to this data marketplace, the issue is in general they sell raw data, and so the buyer, once the buyer buys the data, the buyer buys raw data, and then once the buyer buys the raw data, the buyer essentially can do anything it wants with the data. And hence, this can have huge privacy challenges and risks. So I think also this is part of the reason why the data marketplace today is in its very nascent form. Like there are many of these concerns and considerations. So, but in the future, we want to enable data to really be more widely used. So another issue today is the data silos. A lot of valuable data, because they are sensitive, they cannot be very well utilized. They stay locked up in these data silos. So for either the government or businesses or individuals, if they can actually be able to use this data, then it can help them make much better decisions and so on.
Right.
So with this,
do you have an example? Do you have an example of how Oasis Labs is applying this in healthcare?
Sure. Yes, I can give you an example of in the genomic use case in a second. So essentially, then with this technology, we can enable a new type of data economy that we call responsible data economy. So in this setting, for example, when we talk about data marketplace, it's no longer that the buyer buys raw data from the seller. In this case, in this new paradigm, the buyer can buy essentially a certain type of usage of the data. For example, if you want to compute some statistics, let's say even in healthcare, you want to compute some statistics or you want to train a model over some data, then you can do that. And then in this way, it can protect the user's privacy and also still enable this type of, like, either it's medical research or it's the government needs to have better better statistics of what's happening. So we can enable this type of use cases while still protecting users' privacy, because then the buyer in this case, they buy the usage of the data and they won't get the raw data, so that they essentially users' privacy and also their rights to data will be still protected. So one concrete example use case that we are actually in the process of launching a product on is in the genomic use case. So you may be familiar with, for example, 23andMe. So 23andMe and Ancestry. So these type of companies, they provide genomic analysis to users. But both actually 23andMe and Ancestry recently have gone through, even before COVID, they have gone through some layoffs, citing slowdown on adoption due to, in particular, privacy concerns. So actually, many friends of mine have told me about their concerns about their genomic data actually gets into hands of others, and they, it's really privacy sensitive. So what we are doing here with this responsible data economy technology is that, so in this case, when we launch, actually it will be the first time where users can become owners of their genomic data. So the users' genomic data is stored in encrypted form, and the users have control of how the data will be used. They can specify how the data can be used. So for example, we are doing this in partnership with another genomic company. So the user can give consent for the genomic company to run genomic analysis on their data, but nothing else. So then in this case, our platform enables the genomic company to run their genomic analysis in the secure computing environment, so that they can provide the service, can provide the genomic analysis results to the users, but they never have raw access to the data. So then in this case, they cannot go
who gets paid?
Sell users.
So a company pays for the genomic data. The patient's given consent. Does the patient get some of that money?
So
in that model?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So in this case, actually, so one, the user pays to get the genomic analysis results from the company. So in this case, the user pays. But in other cases, for example, a pharmaceutical company wants to use users' data to do some analysis for developing better drugs and so on. So then in this case, the pharmaceutical company actually can pay to the users for their access to the data. And then the blockchain actually also tracks that's how the pharmaceutical company uses the data, whose data it has used, and then can help actually distribute the value created from that as well. So this is another great marriage between the blockchain technology and the privacy technology to enable this type of use cases.
Sure. Well, we got some requests to talk about, given the COVID crisis and the COVID crisis right now, what role can blockchain play in the COVID crisis? And we have certainly looked at contact tracing and the concerns that people have with privacy in contact tracing. We've taken we're not using blockchain for contact tracing at this point. How has Oasis Labs approached it?
I see. Right. So at Oasis Labs, we also build different privacy technologies. So in this particular case, we actually have a project in collaboration with the researchers from UC Berkeley and also NUS in Singapore, developing new privacy technologies to enable privacy-preserving contact tracing. For example, we actually have an extension to the Google Apple exposure notification protocol to actually add more privacy protection, so that we can ensure that in that case, users can just learn whether they have been in close contacts with someone who have been diagnosed with COVID-19 without actually revealing any other information, either about the users or the other person who actually has contracted COVID-19. So there are many.
And what if they don't want their information tracked? What if they don't want their phone or Google Apple to be tracking them? How does a person control that?
Right.
Do they have control over that, or is it just we anonymize it somewhere along the line? Someone could figure out who you are, but can they actually control it?
Right. Yeah, that's a very good question. So in this particular case, our protocol called the ePeoning actually ensures that users are not being tracked. The only thing that the user will learn is whether you have been in close contact with someone who has been diagnosed with COVID-19, but not anything else. And so this is another example. You talked about the trade-offs. It's another great example showing that here we don't need to trade off. We can have great privacy and also at the same time enable users to learn the information that the user needs to learn. And also just as a brief note, since you mentioned about this COVID-19 and the contact tracing and the trade-off with privacy and so on. So we actually are launching another event called the Responsible Data Summit. And one of the tracks is actually on what we call responsible data in the time of a pandemic, talking about this topic. And we have a great list of speakers, and that will be on July 14, and the live event is on July 28. Just responsibledata.ai. So,
we can talk about COVID in that context as well, right?
Right, exactly.
Right.
And also you have been asking me a lot of great questions. I also want to take a little bit of time to ask you some questions about your work, especially given your unique background of this great mix between both healthcare and also computing technologies. So I think your views will be really helpful for the audience as well. So in particular, talking about COVID-19, right? Sure. So essentially, moving to these more urgent issues. So again, COVID-19 has brought a number of questions regarding the importance of user privacy versus transparent data to the forefront. So I also wanted to,
Right.
I think it'll be great for you to share a little bit what you think are the trade-offs and also what role does HIPAA play in this. I've
Right.
heard there has been some discussions about maybe actually in certain cases the HIPAA is the HIPAA laws, the HIPAA rules are even requirements are even being relaxed.
Sure. I tell people with HIPAA, you have to understand HIPAA is about protecting and making sure your data is shared the way you want it shared. If I decide to share my data, right, as a person decides to, I can put it on a billboard if I want to. I can say, these are my COVID results. That we have to understand, HIPAA doesn't prevent me sharing my data with someone else and letting them use it the way I see fit. That's really what it's about. And so we do caution, though, if you come out of a healthcare setting, if you use another entity, they might be covered under consumer privacy laws. So again, any use case we look at or business issue, I'm looking at the regulations, whether it be HIPAA, whether it be a state privacy consumer law, and how data is moving. That said, anything in healthcare, we start with patient consent, and then patient consent. And what we ultimately, an end user who wants to use their data, I said, to your point, I'm not sure it's the raw data they need about COVID. Do you need my raw data about me and COVID? No, you need the insights from that and how you're going to combine it with other information to allow people to safely return to work, to safely travel, to safely interact in public or with their family members. And so we still have so much to learn about COVID. So I look and say, for blockchain right now, where it's going to be most useful in our fight against COVID is going to be sharing data about COVID in a way that's trusted and transparent, more for population than for individuals, right? So that we can act on large data sets and return that back and forth, and everyone can agree and trust it, because right now there's so much debate coming out and recommendations coming out on a daily basis that seems to be changing from organizations. So we need a way for all these organizations to share and trust the data. And I think that'll be the first step in going a long way towards helping to fight COVID. The second place where it can come in has less to do with the disease and more to do about the supply chain. And blockchain, there's not a better place, a use case in healthcare and the operations side of the house for supply chain of where we're moving things. And I think this will become extremely important when we talk about, hopeful, very hopeful, everyone's very hopeful that there's going to be vaccines available for COVID. And so how we responsibly distribute that in a way, again, that's transparent and equitable. So some good use cases ahead for COVID. I think we're almost out of time here. Were there any last burning questions or any wrap up you wanted to give before we have to say goodbye to everybody?
Maybe just one more question. Given your experience in the domain, can you talk about what are your biggest concerns and challenges that you see in the space, and in particular the challenges that technologies you think can help address in this space, in what you just talked about?
So I think the challenges, I've been, again, in emerging technology my whole career, and I think that challenges are always less about the technology than about the business value and the people who are interested in using it or resistant to using it. And so we have to spend quite a bit of time assuring that the business issue people are trying to solve, that blockchain is the way to go. I don't come in and sell blockchain. I come in and talk about business issues and where we find the good fit and we move forward. But we have to spend a lot of time up front on business value and aligning what people see across an ecosystem, because what's valuable to one person in the ecosystem or one organization, the other member of the ecosystem will have a different value. And so how we align value across an ecosystem, those things are more important in those discussions almost than the technology itself. So
yeah,
great question.
Point.
Great question.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. As technologists, oftentimes we particularly mainly focus on technology, but it's so important to remember that right, we need to make sure that the business models work and people are incentivized to utilize these technologies.
Yeah, the value has to make sense, or you won't be able to move forward. So I spend more time on that, and then working with great technologists once we say, hey, we really feel like we have good business value here. Now let's work with a technologist together to design to that. Yeah. So thank you. This has been a great conversation. Really, really nice. Thanks, Dawn.
Yeah, great talking together. Thanks. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.